Let me start with Chris. Chris, just on the back of one time then announcing that they are suspending their services. Firstly, did it come as a surprise to you?
Look, I think it probably did come a little bit of a surprise, although they'd obviously gone into business rescue, and we know that they were trying everything possible to try and make this operation work. So it's always difficult. Probably not a surprise to everybody, but we were hoping obviously that they would get through this difficult time.
Yeah, Lyndon, were you surprised?
I was surprised that they closed because I thought, a business rescue. The business rescue concept is very similar to what we have in the USA, a mechanism there called Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection. And a number of airlines, a lot of the big household name airlines have at some stage or other in their histories been through that bankruptcy protection scenario. American Airlines at the moment is still under Chapter 11. And what it does is it provides a moratorium on your on paying your creditors while you reorganize your debt and rearrange your finance so that you can steady the ship. And it's really in the best interests of all parties to have that, because clearly creditors would rather get all their money rather than just a few cents to the rand or a few cents in the dollar in America. So I think that was a surprise that they should have pulled the plug on Friday when they were still in a business rescue and before the court had even ruled on the feasibility of the business rescue.
So you're suggesting that even in America, a number of these airlines are going through a similar process? Yes,
absolutely, and they have for a number of years. It's just this particular mechanism, this business rescue process is relatively new under South African legislation. It was only introduced into the Companies Act here a couple of years ago, and there haven't been too many cases where it's been tested. But this is obviously one of the most high-profile ones.
So are these also low-cost airlines in the U.S.?
It's a variety, including mainline carriers. We've had big airlines in the past like Pan Am and TWA, and we've had, I think, United. We've had American. We've had a whole array of American carriers at one or other time going through Chapter 11 to help them reorganize.
And is that an indication of the difficulty that the aviation industry is facing?
At various stages, yeah. I mean, it tends to be that they go in and out of Chapter 11 whenever the industry has been in a down cycle. And it certainly is a cyclical industry. We know that. We have these deep troughs and these peaks. If we just put the industry into some perspective, this year we're talking about globally here an industry returning a profit margin of about 0.5% on turnover. So we're looking at global profit of $4 billion. That sounds like a lot of money, but when you consider it's on about $670 billion turnover, that's actually paltry.
And clearly it means the same for our industry here in South Africa as well.
It certainly does. And, if you look at the data put out by the International Air Transport Association, they're saying, Africa at best will break even this year.
And again, Chris, the question is why? Why is the industry going through this? Is there a particular reason?
Well, I think there are a number of factors that are contributing to this. Firstly, obviously, the global economic slowdown has definitely impacted through to South Africa in terms of the travel. We are actually in South Africa not going through a growth phase, particularly in domestic travel. And if you talk about international travel, it's a couple of percent above. So we've got a very low growth, and obviously all the airlines are now fighting for market share and fighting for the passengers that are there. The whole thing is led by very high cost base, which is sitting there from a direct operating cost perspective. Firstly, obviously, the fuel situation, where fuel is sort of like pegged at a previously untenable level of around about $110 to $120 a barrel. And then with our exchange rate, which has now obviously gone up to the 830 to 860 band at the moment, that's obviously costing the airlines a heck of a lot more in terms of rand value. And obviously there's also the airport charges, the ATNS charges, other charges and taxes, safety and security charges, and all the high costs, including maintenance, which is very much a dollar-based price, specifically on spare parts that the airlines have to bring in. And again, that translates to high rand value. So the cost side is we're at a very high level, and the revenue is not balancing that. I mean, the cost versus revenue equation is just not balancing out there. And as Lyndon has referred to, it's at really pretty much break even around the world. Effectively, customers, and quite rightly, are looking for the best price, and they're waiting for the best price, and they're not prepared to look for the wait for or not prepared to pay for the high fares, which is obviously what actually enables airlines to actually make some money. These low fares and specials that one sees are just not sustainable throughout the cabin of the aircraft.
But Chris, you then expect low-cost airlines to thrive in that environment where customers are waiting for low fares.
Yes, they do. I mean, but that's their business. That's where they came to. But I think what has happened to us is we've been overtaken by the high cost base, because the low-cost carriers that are operating in South Africa are competing firstly in the same market as the full-service airlines, and they're also exposed to exactly the same cost base. There's no break for low-cost carriers in terms of costs, so they have to go through that. In the case of some of the other airlines, for example, well, particularly on one-time side, they had a slightly older fleet than other airlines, and obviously their operating cost, particularly in respect to fuel, was probably a lot higher than others who are operating the newer aircraft.
That's a very important point, and this is where I want to bring in the Competition Commission. But before I do, Chris, please clarify that point. Is that a legislative issue? Should for instance, SAA be regulated in terms of where it operates, given the fact that it gets its funding from the fiscus?
No, look, I don't think so. I think this is domestic airline travel has been deregulated completely since 1990, and effectively any airline can operate on any route in any situation, and you're not allowed to discriminate technically between airlines in terms of costs that are charged to airlines. So, it's a negotiation between the fuel companies directly with the airline in terms of the price they pay. The charges of the AXA and the ATNS charges are all regulated as well by an economic regulator appointed by the minister, and so they all have to, in that respect, they all have to pay the same bills.
Lyndon, do you agree? Because some of the low-cost airlines have complained that they're competing with or competing against SAA that is funded by the fiscus when they have to carry the cost completely, the input costs, for example.
I don't think the issue of ownership is really a critical one here. I think everybody's competing, whether it's one time competing with Mango or one time competing with Kalula. They're competing. There are other players in the market. This industry, the domestic industry, was deregulated in 1991, and anyone that's entered the market since then has known full well that they're competing with, that one of the competitors is going to have been a state-owned airline called SAA. Okay, since then we've had SA Express come into the market as well, but they're not a low-cost airline and they don't compete on the same routes as One Time was. So I think it's a bit of a red herring, and I think everybody is subject to the same issues. The state-owned carriers are equally exposed to the high fuel prices and the same airport charges and the same air navigation charges and the weather charges and passenger departure taxes and tourism levies and VAT and everything else that's heaped on top of air tickets.
But let me throw out an allegation here, Lyndon, if I may, because ComAir has alleged, for instance, that Mango has lost almost $500 million in 6 years, and they are saying that that's serious money to compete against.
I'm not really wanting to get into he says, she says, but I heard the debate yesterday, and I've heard Mango responding and saying that those numbers are inaccurate and that, in fact, they're profitable.
Very interesting. Again, let's talk from a point of view of the Competition Commission. Isn't there truly anything then that the Competition Commission can do or should do or has been asked to do?
Thanks, Kolani. I think we need to distinguish between two things here, and I think it's very important we do that at the outset. As the Competition Commission, we enforce competition law, and it's very clear in terms of our legislation the kind of practices that we can investigate. So that would be kind of our investigative prosecutorial hat. On the other hand, there's some broader policy questions around the aviation industry that are coming through in the discussion now. And some of those questions might have to do with ownership and how the state conducts itself in that sector. But those are two very separate issues. Now, in terms of our mandate in competition law, we in terms of, when we initiate investigations, we have to have reasonable suspicion that a company has engaged in conduct that can be linked to anti-competitive outcomes. And so we have quite a standard a threshold to meet before we can enter into investigations. And, the fact of funding source, or whether somebody has cheaper funding than someone else, or whether they have the state behind them, is quite a separate issue from that. So I guess, in short, what I'm saying is that in terms of enforcement, and obviously we also don't discuss our investigations in public, but enforcement in general, we haven't quite met that standard in this instance. We're being asked to investigate, but this is not an investigation issue. When you listen to what people are saying, it's actually a policy question which has to be addressed by policymakers and decision makers in that sphere, obviously looking at the competitive landscape. But it's not an enforcement issue that we can say that SAA has contravened the Competition Act, and therefore we have a mandate to intervene or to be invasive in the way we deal with them. We don't have that yet.